far beyond the edge of human space in a region of stars that no telescope on Earth had ever mapped. A great alliance of alien worlds was dying. The Valkyrene Concord had stood for over 10,000 years. It was a union of many different species who had once fought each other, then learned to live in peace, and finally built cities and fleets and trade routes that stretched across 1,000 star systems. They believed their peace would last forever. They were wrong. The enemy came from the black spaces between galaxies, where no light reached and no ship dared to travel. The Concord called them the Skarnhive. They were not a nation or a kingdom. They were a single mind spread across billions of bodies, each one connected to the others through a strange biological network that let them think as one creature. They did not want land. They did not want treasure. They wanted only to consume every living world they touched and turn it into fuel for their endless hunger. For 3 years, the Skarnhive had crushed one Concord world after another. Entire star systems that had held peaceful cities and quiet farms were now silent and gray, stripped of every living thing. The Concord fleets fought bravely, but their ships were built for trade and diplomacy, not for war. Their weapons were old. Their captains had never faced an enemy like this before. City after city fell. World after world went dark. In the deep council chambers of Velkar Prime, the last great capital of the Concord, an old alien leader named Ambassador Thren stood before a room full of frightened officials. His skin was pale blue, and his eyes, large and dark, showed the weight of centuries of leadership. He had watched his people build peace across the stars. Now he watched that peace burn. "We have tried every weapon we have," he said quietly. "We have tried every strategy our scholars could think of. The hive does not stop. It does not tire. It does not fear death because it has no fear at all. We are losing this war, and soon we will lose everything." A younger official, a scientist named Vel, stepped forward. She held a small data tablet in her trembling hands. "There is one option left," she said. "A species we have watched from a distance for many years. They live on a small blue world in a quiet corner of the galaxy. We call them the Terrans. They call themselves humans." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Many of the older officials shook their heads. They had studied humanity for decades through hidden probes and quiet observation. What they had seen troubled them deeply. Humans fought wars among themselves constantly. They built weapons capable of destroying their own planet many times over. They argued. They hated. They killed one another over borders and beliefs and old grudges that stretched back centuries. To the Concord, who valued harmony above all things, humanity looked less like a civilization and more like a storm that had not yet burned itself out. "They are savages," said one official, an old alien named Doru, his voice sharp with disgust. "We have watched their wars. We have watched their history. They are barely more advanced than animals fighting over territory. How can such a species help us survive?" Vel did not back down. "They are savages, yes, but savages who have never lost a war they were determined to win. Every threat they have faced, they have overcome, no matter the cost. We do not need gentle allies right now, Ambassador. We need someone willing to do what must be done." Thren was silent for a long moment. Outside the chamber windows in the night sky above Velkar Prime, a faint red glow could be seen on the horizon. It was the light of a burning colony, still visible even from this distance. The enemy was getting closer every day. "Send the signal," Theron said at last. "Send it to Earth. Tell them everything. Tell them what is coming, and pray they answer." That night, deep in the labs beneath Velkar Prime, Vel activated a device that had never been used before. It was called the Long Voice, a transmitter built to send a message across vast distances of space, faster than any ship could travel. The signal carried images of burning worlds, recordings of dying cities, and a simple, desperate plea for help. It was aimed at a small, unremarkable planet that humans called home. The signal took weeks to cross the distance between the stars. When it finally reached Earth, it arrived not as a whisper, but as a shock wave that shook every government, every scientist, and every ordinary person who watched the news that day. For the first time in history, humanity received undeniable proof that they were not alone in the universe. And the proof came wrapped in images of death and destruction, a warning of what could come for them next. In a quiet office in Geneva, a woman named Dr. Amara Chan stared at the screen in front of her, her coffee growing cold beside her keyboard. She was the head of Earth's newly formed Deep Space Monitoring Division, a small agency that most people had never heard of. She had spent her career searching for signs of life beyond Earth, mostly as a formality, mostly expecting to find nothing. Now the signal sat decoded on her screen, and her hands would not stop shaking. "This is real," she whispered to herself. "This is actually real." Within hours, the signal had been shared with world leaders across the globe. Some refused to believe it. Others panicked. Old rivalries between nations flared up instantly as leaders argued about who should control the response, who should speak for humanity, and whether this was even a genuine message or some kind of trick. For a species that had never faced a true outside threat, the sudden appearance of aliens begging for help brought out both the best and worst of human nature. But not everyone hesitated. In a military base hidden deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, a retired fleet admiral named Elena Vass watched the same signal on a secure screen. Surrounded by generals and scientists who had spent decades preparing for something like this without ever truly believing it would happen. Vass was 61 years old, her hair silver, her face lined from years of hard decisions. She had spent much of her career warning that humanity needed to be ready for anything, that the stars would not stay quiet forever. Most people had called her paranoid. Tonight she was proven right. "They're asking for our help," said a young officer beside her, his voice trembling. "Do we even know if we can help them? Do we know if we should?" Vass did not answer right away. She looked at the images on the screen, the burning cities, the dying alien children being carried through the ruins of their homes. She had seen suffering before, in wars fought on Earth between nations who should have known better. This was different. This was a whole civilization staring into the face of extinction. "It doesn't matter if we should," Vass finally said. "It matters that we can. And if we can, then we will." Across the world, similar conversations were happening in secret rooms and public parliaments alike. Some argued that Earth should stay hidden, that responding Clear's throat to the signal would only draw the attention of an enemy too powerful to fight. Others argued that if humanity turned its back on a dying civilization now, it would deserve no help when its own turn came. In the end, the decision was not made by a single vote or a single leader. It was made by thousands of separate choices, made in offices and command centers around the world. Choices that slowly gathered into a single unstoppable current. Humanity was going to answer the call. Not out of pure kindness and not out of blind courage either. It was going to answer because deep down, something in the human spirit refused to let a cry for help go unanswered, even one that came from the stars. Far away on Velkar Prime, Ambassador Thren stood once more at the window of the council chamber, watching the distant glow of a burning world. He did not know if the humans would answer. He did not know if they even could. All he knew was that the long voice had been sent, and now all the Concord could do was wait and hope that somewhere out there a strange and violent species was willing to become their last hope. He was about to find out just how right and how terrifying that hope would turn out to be. The days after the signal arrived were unlike anything Earth had ever experienced. News networks around the world played the alien footage on a constant loop, showing burning cities and desperate faces that did not belong to any human nation. People stood in the streets, staring up at the sky, as if they might suddenly see something there. Children asked their parents if the monsters from the videos could come to Earth next. Parents did not have a good answer. In Geneva, the United Nations called an emergency session unlike any before it. Leaders from every major nation crowded into a single hall, along with military advisors, scientists, and translators working overtime to keep up with the flood of questions. At the center of the room stood a massive screen playing the alien message on repeat, the same haunting images echoing over and over. Burning skies, crumbling towers, and a single alien voice speaking words that had been translated into every human language within days. "We are the Velkarine Concord," the voice said, calm despite the destruction shown behind it. "We are dying. We ask for your help." The debate that followed lasted for nearly 2 full days without pause. Some delegates argued that Earth should ignore the signal entirely. A representative from one of the larger nations stood and said what many others were thinking, but were afraid to say aloud. "We know nothing about these creatures," he said. "We know nothing about this enemy they speak of. If we respond, we may be inviting a war to our own doorstep, a war we cannot possibly win. Perhaps it is wiser to stay silent and hope this threat never finds us." Others disagreed strongly. A delegate from a smaller island nation stood next, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "If we hide now and this enemy finds us anyway, we will have wasted our only chance to make an ally. And what kind of species do we want to be? One that turns away from the dying, or one that stands beside them?" The argument continued back and forth, nation against nation, old alliances tested by a threat none of them fully understood. Meanwhile, outside the halls of power, ordinary people around the world had already begun making up their own minds. Volunteers lined up outside newly formed recruitment centers, uncertain what exactly they were volunteering for, but certain they wanted to be part of whatever came next. Scientists abandoned old projects to study the alien technology hidden within the signal itself. Engineers who had spent their careers designing rockets and satellites suddenly found themselves working around the clock on projects labeled with code names like Vanguard and Ember. Projects that had existed in secret for years but had never before been given real purpose. It was in this chaos that Elena Vass finally stepped forward. She had spent 30 years in the military, most of them fighting to convince skeptical politicians that Earth needed to prepare for threats beyond its own borders. She had been mocked for it in the press, called paranoid, called a warmonger obsessed with enemies that did not exist. Now, standing before the Emergency Council in Geneva, she was the only person in the room who did not look surprised by what was happening. For 50 years, Voss said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, certain nations have quietly built and prepared forces meant for exactly this kind of moment. Not because we knew aliens existed, but because history has taught us, again and again, that the universe does not owe us safety. We built fleets. We built weapons. We trained soldiers for wars we hoped would never come. That day is here. The room fell silent. Voss continued, her tone hardening. The Concord is asking for our help because they have run out of options. They have tried patience. They have tried diplomatic. They have tried every gentle solution their culture could offer, and none of it worked. They need something different now. They need someone willing to fight without hesitation, without mercy, until the threat is gone. That is something humanity has always been very good at, whether we are proud of it or not. Some delegates looked uncomfortable at her words. Others nodded slowly, understanding the truth buried inside them. Humanity's history was full of violence, yes, but it was also full of moments where ordinary people rose up against impossible odds and refused to back down. If ever there was a species built for a fight like this, it might be humans. After 2 days of arguing, the vote finally came. It was not unanimous. Several nations abstained, unwilling to commit their people to a war among the stars, but the majority agreed. Earth would respond to the Concord's call, not with words alone, but with action. Within the Concord itself, Ambassador Theron waited anxiously for any sign of a response. The Skarn hive continued its advance, swallowing 2 more colony worlds in the days since the signal had been sent. Some among the Concord Council had already begun preparing evacuation plans for Velkar Prime itself, quietly moving important records and treasures to hidden vaults, expecting the worst. Then, on the 7th day, a new signal arrived. It was short, simple, and carried none of the poetic diplomacy that Concord was used to hearing from allied species. It was blunt, almost cold in its directness. "This is Earth," the message said. "We received your call. We are coming. Prepare landing coordinates for our forces." Thren read the message 3 times before he fully believed it. Around him, the council chamber erupted into a mixture of relief and confusion. Some officials wept openly, grateful that help was finally coming. Others whispered nervous questions to each other. What kind of help would this be? What kind of species would send such a short, emotionless reply to a plea for survival? Val, the young scientist who had first suggested contacting Earth, stood quietly near the back of the chamber, watching the reactions around her. She alone seemed to understand what the human short message truly meant. It was not coldness, it was focus. Humans were not interested in long speeches or careful diplomacy right now. They were interested in results. "They are not coming to comfort us," she said softly to Thren as he approached her. "They are coming to fight." Thren nodded slowly, staring at the message glowing on the screen before him. Then let us hope they are as capable as they are direct. Back on Earth, preparations moved forward at a pace that shocked even the military leaders overseeing them. Shipyards that had been quietly constructing vessels in secret for decades suddenly shifted into full production. Massive hangars hidden beneath mountains and deserts opened their doors for the first time, revealing fleets of warships that ordinary citizens had never known existed. Soldiers who had trained for years without knowing exactly what they were training for finally received their orders. Scientists worked without sleep, studying alien technology recovered from the signal itself, hoping to understand what kind of enemy humanity was about to face. Elena Voss, now given full command of what would soon be called the Vanguard Fleet, stood in the control room of the primary shipyard, watching massive warships being fueled and armed for a mission unlike any in human history. She thought about the images from the alien signal, the burning cities, the desperate faces. She thought about the short, blunt message Earth had sent in reply. There would be no turning back now. "Get every ship ready," she said to the officers around her. "We are not going out there to negotiate. We are going out there to end a threat before it reaches our home. Whatever it takes." The officers nodded, and the shipyard roared to life with activity, preparing humanity's answer to a call for help that had crossed the stars. Far above Earth, in orbit, the first warships of the Vanguard Fleet began to gather, dark shapes against the black of space, waiting for the order that would send them into a war no human had ever imagined fighting. The invitation had been accepted. Now humanity would show the galaxy exactly what that acceptance meant. Beneath the Rocky Mountains, hidden inside a facility that did not appear on any public map, Elena Voss walked through corridors that had been carved into solid stone decades earlier. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone. Above her, massive support beams held up a ceiling tall enough to house buildings several stories high. This was Forge Base, one of 7 such facilities built quietly around the world after a string of close calls in Earth's history had convinced certain governments that the planet needed more than nuclear weapons and fighter jets to survive whatever the future might bring. For 50 years, Forge Base and its sister facilities had worked in near total secrecy. Officially, they did not exist. Unofficially, they had built and maintained a fleet of advanced warships, far beyond anything the public believed humanity possessed. The reasoning behind the project had always been simple, even if it sounded paranoid to outsiders. Humanity had survived asteroid impacts, world wars, and the constant threat of self-destruction through nuclear conflict. Someone, somewhere, had decided that the next great threat might not come from within, and that Earth needed to be ready, regardless of how unlikely that threat seemed. Now, that unlikely threat had arrived, and the doors of Forge Base opened for the first time to reveal exactly what 50 years of secrecy had built. Ambassador Thren and a small delegation of Concord officials had been invited to witness the activation firsthand, traveling to Earth aboard one of their fastest diplomatic vessels. Thren stood beside Voss in the control room, overlooking the primary hangar. His large, dark eyes wide with something between awe and disbelief as massive doors slid open to reveal rows of warships stretching farther than he could see. "This cannot be possible," Thren whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Our scans of your world showed nothing like this. Your technology level, according to our observations, was decades behind our own. Voss allowed herself a small, tired smile. Your scans were watching our cities, Ambassador, watching our arguments, our elections, our television broadcasts. You were not watching this. The warships before them were unlike anything the Concorde had built. Sleek and dark, their hulls were covered in overlapping armor plates, designed to absorb and deflect incoming fire. Weapon systems bristled along every surface, some familiar in design, others clearly built using principles the Concorde scientists and the delegation did not immediately recognize. At the center of the hangar sat the flagship of the entire fleet, a massive vessel easily 3 times the size of anything else in the hangar, its hull marked with a simple name painted near the bow. Reckoning. How long have you been building this? Asked one of the Concorde scientists, a nervous alien named Dor, who had originally argued against contacting Earth at all. 50 years, Voss answered simply. Some of our nations never fully trusted each other, even after working together on projects like this one. We built enough ships, enough weapons to make sure that whatever threat eventually found us, we would not be caught helpless. We would not be caught helpless. We hoped we would never need any of it. Thren studied the fleet before him, a strange mixture of relief and unease settling over him. The Concorde had spent millennia perfecting diplomacy, negotiation, and peaceful cooperation between different species. They had built beautiful cities and advanced technology meant to improve life, not destroy it. Humanity, it seemed, had spent its relatively short history preparing quietly for war, even during times of apparent peace. You built all of this, Thren said slowly, without knowing what enemy you would eventually face. We built it because we didn't know. Voss replied, That's the point, Ambassador. If we had waited until we knew exactly what threat was coming, we would already be too late to prepare for it. Over the following days, human and Concorde scientists worked together, studying each other's technology as quickly as possible. The Concorde shared everything they knew about the Skarn hive, its biology, its tactics, its terrifying lack of individual fear or hesitation. In exchange, human engineers explained the basic principles behind their warships, weapons, and defenses, though certain details remained closely guarded secrets even from their new allies. What the Concorde scientists learned troubled them deeply. Human weapons were designed not just to disable enemy ships, but to destroy them completely, with redundant systems built specifically to ensure that even heavily damaged enemy vessels could not escape or regroup. Human tactical simulations run through advanced computer systems consistently favored aggressive, high-risk strategies that sacrificed caution for speed and overwhelming force. It was a philosophy of war that valued swift, total victory over careful, measured combat. Your species does not fight to weaken an enemy, Vel observed one afternoon, watching a human tactical simulation on a large display screen. You fight to erase them. Voss, standing nearby, nodded without any hint of shame. The Skarn hive does not stop attacking until it is destroyed or until there is nothing left to attack. You told us that yourselves. There is no room in a fight like that for half measures. Belle said nothing, but her expression showed she understood the truth in Voss's words, even if it disturbed her. As preparation continued, the vanguard fleet grew stronger by the day. Soldiers who had trained for years without knowing their true purpose finally received full briefings on the coming war. Pilots practiced maneuvers in advanced flight simulators built specifically to mimic the erratic, overwhelming attack patterns the Scarn Hive was known to use. Engineers worked around the clock, installing newly designed weapon systems onto every ship in the fleet, incorporating knowledge gained from the Concorde's own encounters with the enemy. Elena Voss spent most nights in the command center, reviewing battle plans and troop deployments with a small team of trusted officers. She barely slept, driven by the knowledge that every day of preparation could mean the difference between victory and disaster once the fleet finally arrived at the front lines. She thought often about the images from the original distress signal. Burning cities, desperate faces, entire worlds turned to ash. She refused to let that same fate befall Earth, and she was equally determined not to let it happen to the allies who had trusted humanity enough to ask for help. On the final night before departure, Vass stood alone in the observation deck of the Reckoning, staring out at the massive fleet assembled in orbit around Earth. Hundreds of warships floated silently in the darkness, their hulls catching faint reflections of sunlight and starlight alike. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, built in secret over 50 years, and now finally ready to be unleashed for the very first time. Thren joined her quietly, standing beside her at the observation window. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I confess," Thren finally said, "there is a part of me that fears what your fleet will do once it reaches the front lines. Your species is capable of great violence. Admiral Vass, I have seen it in your history, in your weapons, in the way your officers speak of total victory as though mercy were a weakness." Vass did not turn away from the window. "You came to us because gentle solutions failed, Ambassador. You said it yourself. Sometimes survival requires more than diplomacy. Sometimes it requires people willing to become exactly what the enemy fears most." Thren considered her words carefully before responding. "And if that fear becomes something the rest of the galaxy comes to feel about humanity as well?" Vass finally turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. "Then let them fear us for saving lives instead of ignoring us while more worlds burn." The next morning, the Vanguard fleet received its final orders. Engines roared to life across hundreds of warships as the massive armada began its slow, deliberate departure from Earth's orbit. Crowds gathered around the world watching news, broadcast as the fleet grew smaller and smaller, against a backdrop of stars until finally it disappeared entirely, beginning its long journey toward a war that would test humanity in ways no conflict on Earth ever had. Ambassador Thren watched the departure from the deck of his own vessel, a mixture of hope and quiet dread settling over him. Whatever humanity truly was, gentle allies or terrifying weapon, the galaxy was about to find out. The machine had awakened. Now it was time to see exactly what it had been built to do. The journey to the front lines took nearly 3 weeks, even with the advanced engines humanity had built in secret over the decades. During that time, the crews of the Vanguard fleet trained relentlessly, running simulation after simulation based on everything the Concorde had shared about the Scarn Hive. Pilots practiced evasive maneuvers against simulated swarm attacks. Gunners drilled endlessly on target, Prioritization learning to distinguish between the different types of Skarn bioships reported in Concord battle records. Every soldier aboard every vessel understood, without needing to be told twice, that the coming battle would be unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Elena Voss spent much of the journey in quiet conversation with Ambassador Thren, who had chosen to remain aboard the Reckoning, rather than return to Concord territory ahead of the fleet. Through these talks, Voss learned more about the true nature of the enemy they were about to face. The Skarn hive was not simply a large alien army. It was closer to a single massive organism spread across countless bodies and ships, all connected through a form of biological communication that allowed instant coordination across their entire fleet. Individual Skarn units felt no fear, no hesitation, and no concept of self-preservation. They fought and died without any regard for their own survival, driven only by the hive's singular hunger to consume and expand. They do not retreat, Theron explained one evening, standing beside Voss on the observation deck as stars streaked past outside. They do not surrender. Our fleets learned this lesson at great cost. A wounded Skarn ship will continue attacking until it is completely destroyed, even if doing so accomplishes nothing but its own annihilation. Voss absorbed this information carefully, already turning it over in her mind, searching for weaknesses in the tactics the enemy would surely try to use. If they don't fear death, then fear isn't a weapon we can use against them directly, but confusion might be. Something unpredictable, something they've never adapted to. Theron studied her carefully. Your species specializes in the unpredictable, Admiral. I have seen this in your history, in your tactics. Perhaps that will be your greatest advantage. 3 weeks after leaving Earth, the Vanguard fleet finally arrived at the edge of Concord territory, just as a massive Skarn armada began its assault on Velkar Colony 7, one of the last major population centers still standing before the enemy's advance toward Velkar Prime itself. Concord forces stationed at the colony were already badly outnumbered, their outdated warships struggling to hold a defensive line against wave after wave of Skarn bioships pouring in from the darkness beyond the system's outer planets. Voss stood on the bridge of the Reckoning, watching sensor readouts fill the main display with hundreds of enemy contacts. The Skarn ships were unlike anything built by conventional means. Organic in shape, their hulls resembled twisted shells and jagged spines rather than smooth metal plating. They moved with an eerie, almost fluid grace, swarming together in massive clusters that shifted formation, constantly coordinated by the hive's shared consciousness. Concord forces are requesting immediate assistance, reported a young communications officer, her voice tense. They say they cannot hold the line much longer. Voss's eyes remained fixed on the tactical display. This was the moment 50 years of secret preparation had been building toward. She took a slow breath, steadying herself before giving the order that would commit humanity to open war against an enemy from beyond the stars. All ships, she said, her voice calm but firm, carrying clearly across the fleet-wide communication channel, engage. The Vanguard fleet surged forward, breaking formation into smaller strike groups, exactly as they had practiced during the long journey. Unlike the Concord's more cautious defensive tactics, human ships moved aggressively toward the heart of the Skarn formation. weapon systems already charging as they closed the distance at speeds that startled the watching Concord commanders. The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness of space with brilliant flashes of energy weapons and explosive impacts. Human warships, faster and more maneuverable than anything the Skarnhive had encountered before, wove through the enemy formation with startling precision, striking key targets identified through days of careful study of Concord battle records. Rather than attacking randomly, human forces focused their fire on specific bioships believed to serve as coordination points within the Hive's collective consciousness, based on patterns the Concord scientists had noticed but never been able to fully exploit. The Skarnhive, accustomed to fighting against more predictable, cautious enemies, struggled immediately to adapt to humanity's aggressive, unconventional tactics. Where Concord fleets typically maintained careful formations and measured engagement ranges, human ships broke every expected pattern, executing high-risk maneuvers that repeatedly caught Skarn formations off guard. Small, fast attack craft launched from the larger human warships, diving directly into the heart of enemy clusters and detonating powerful explosive charges before retreating at speeds the lumbering Skarn bioships could not match. Aboard the Reckoning, Voss watched the battle unfold with sharp, focused attention, issuing rapid orders as the situation shifted moment to moment. Group 3, redirect to the northern cluster. They're trying to flank the Concord line. Group 5, target the larger bioship at coordinates 421. That thing is coordinating the swarm's movement. Thren watched from beside her, his expression a mixture of horror and amazement as he witnessed humanity's war tactics in action for the first time. The battle raged with a ferocity that dwarfed anything he had seen from Concord fleets. Human ships taking daring risks that seemed almost reckless, yet consistently paying off through sheer speed, aggression, and creative improvisation. Your soldiers fight as though they have nothing to lose, Thren said quietly, watching a group of human fighter craft execute a maneuver that brought them dangerously close to a massive Skarn bioship before unleashing a devastating barrage of concentrated fire. They have everything to lose, Voss corrected him, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. That's exactly why they fight like this. Hesitation gets people killed out here, Ambassador. So we don't hesitate. The battle continued for nearly 2 hours. A chaotic storm of energy weapons, explosions, and shifting formations across the void of space. Slowly, steadily, the tide began to turn. The Skarnhive, unable to adapt quickly enough to humanity's unpredictable tactics, began losing ships at a rate far higher than anything the Concord had previously managed to inflict. Confused by the sudden change in enemy behavior, the Hive's collective consciousness seemed to hesitate for the first time in the entire war. Individual bioships breaking formation in ways that suggested genuine confusion rather than coordinated strategy. Sensing the shift, Voss pressed the advantage immediately. All groups converge on the central cluster. Break their coordination completely. Do not let them regroup. Human warships surge forward in a final decisive push, striking directly at the heart of the Skarn formation with overwhelming, coordinated force. Within minutes, the once orderly swarm collapsed into chaotic disarray. Individual bioships scattering in random directions as the Hive's collective consciousness struggled to process the sudden, catastrophic losses it had suffered. As the last remaining Skarn ships either fled into deep space or were destroyed outright, a stunned silence fell over the bridge of the reckoning. Concord communication channels erupted with disbelieving voices. Officers and commanders who had spent years fighting a losing war, suddenly witnessing a victory more decisive than anything they had thought possible. Voss allowed herself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction before turning to Thren, who stood staring at the tactical display in stunned silence. "First contact is over, Ambassador. I believe that answers your earlier question." Thren slowly turned to face her, his expression difficult to read. "You have won a single battle, Admiral, but I fear you have also revealed something to the Skarn hive that it did not expect to find in this war. An enemy capable of matching, and perhaps exceeding its own ruthlessness." Voss nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his words. "Then let's hope that's exactly what wins this war." Behind them, across the wreckage-strewn battlefield, the first true engagement between humanity and the Skarn hive had ended in a decisive human victory. But as reports began coming in from deeper Concord territory, it quickly became clear that this had been only the opening skirmish of a much larger, far more brutal war still waiting ahead. News of the victory at Velkar Colony 7 spread quickly across Concord territory, carried by relieved survivors and astonished military commanders who had witnessed the battle firsthand. For the first time in years, hope returned to worlds that had almost given up entirely. Yet alongside that hope came a growing unease among many within the Concord, an uncertainty about exactly what kind of ally they had brought into their war. In the weeks that followed, the Vanguard fleet fought alongside Concord forces in a series of increasingly intense battles, pushing back against Skarn incursions across multiple star systems. With each engagement, human tactics grew bolder, more refined, and undeniably more effective. Concord commanders who had once doubted humanity's usefulness now found themselves eagerly requesting human support whenever Skarn forces threatened their positions. But effectiveness came with a cost that many within the Concord struggled to accept. During a battle near the outer colony of Thesar Reach, human forces encountered a heavily damaged Skarn bioship attempting to retreat after sustaining massive damage. Concord Protocol, built around centuries of careful, measured warfare, called for allowing severely weakened enemy vessels to withdraw when they no longer posed an immediate threat, a practice meant to reduce unnecessary casualties on both sides. Human commanders aboard the Reckoning made a very different decision. Target is retreating, but still capable of relaying tactical data to the wider hive network, reported a tactical officer aboard the Reckoning. Recommend pursuit and destruction to prevent intelligence leaks. Voss authorized the order without hesitation. Pursue and destroy. Do not let that ship reach the rest of the hive. A Concord liaison officer stationed aboard the Reckoning, a young alien named Kessa, watched the order carried out with visible discomfort. The Skarn bioship, already crippled and clearly incapable of continuing the fight, was pursued and destroyed within minutes by a squadron of human fighters. There had been no attempt at capture, no consideration given to potential intelligence that might have been gained from a disabled but intact vessel. That ship posed no further threat, Kessa said carefully, approaching Voss after the engagement had ended. Concord doctrine would have allowed it to withdraw, Concord doctrine has been losing this war for 3 years, Voss replied evenly, though not unkindly. Every ship the Hive loses is a ship that cannot return to attack another world later. We're not fighting for points, Lieutenant. We're fighting to end this as quickly and completely as possible. Kessa said nothing further, but the exchange was quietly reported back to Concord leadership, adding to a growing list of similar incidents. Human forces, it seemed, operated under an entirely different philosophy of warfare than anything the Concord had practiced before. Where Concord fleets sought to minimize casualties and preserve resources whenever possible, human commanders consistently prioritized total, decisive victory, even when doing so meant taking risks or making choices that struck many Concord officers as unnecessarily harsh. Reports continued to accumulate over the following weeks. Human boarding parties assaulted, damaged, scarred vessels with a ferocity that left little room for anything resembling mercy. Driven by a grim understanding that any surviving, scarred biomass could potentially regenerate and continue fighting if not completely eliminated, human strategists proposed and executed high-risk offensive operations that Concord commanders considered reckless, sacrificing smaller forces in calculated maneuvers designed to lure larger scarn formations into devastating ambush. Back on Velkar Prime, Ambassador Thren found himself increasingly drawn into heated debates within the Concord Council chambers as officials argued fiercely over the implications of humanity's growing role in the war effort. They are winning battles we could never have won alone, argued one council member during a particularly tense session. Should we truly concern ourselves with their methods when those methods are saving countless lives across our territory? And what happens, countered another official, an elder statesman named Corvain, when this war finally ends? What do we do with a species that has shown itself capable of such calculated ruthlessness, now fully aware of its own military superiority over every other civilization in this region of space? Thren listened to these arguments carefully, torn between gratitude for humanity's undeniable success on the battlefield and genuine concern about what that success might mean for the future. He requested another meeting with Elaine of Voss, hoping to better understand the philosophy driving humanity's approach to the war. They met aboard the Reckoning in a quiet observation room overlooking the vast fleet, currently stationed near a heavily contested border system. Voss looked tired, the weeks of constant combat clearly weighing on her, though her resolve remained as firm as ever. Your council is concerned about us, Thren said directly. Deciding bluntness would serve the conversation better than careful diplomacy. Voss did not seem surprised. I imagine they are. We've given them plenty of reasons to be. Do you not share their concern, Admiral? Does it not trouble you, the things your forces have done in this war? Voss was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the fleet beyond the observation window. Every choice we've made out here troubles me, Ambassador. Every ship we've destroyed, every risk we've taken, every life we've spent to save 100 more. But I've learned something in my years of service, something I think your people are only now beginning to understand. War doesn't reward hesitation. It doesn't reward mercy toward an enemy who shows none in return. The Scarn Hive doesn't care about your customs or your careful rules of engagement. It only cares about consuming everything in its path. And so you believe the only answer is to match that ruthlessness. I believe, Voss said slowly, that the only answer is to end this war as quickly and as completely as possible before more worlds like Velkar Colony 7 are lost. If that means making choices your people find uncomfortable, then I'm willing to live with that discomfort, so long as it means fewer graves at the end of this war. Thrain considered her words carefully, understanding the painful logic behind them, even as it conflicted with everything his own culture valued. The Concord had built its entire civilization around careful diplomacy, patience, and measured responses to conflict. Humanity operated under an entirely different set of principles, one built through a much shorter, far more violent history filled with wars and hardships that had shaped their species into something the Concord had never fully understood until now. As the weeks turned into months, more and more, Concord military officers began quietly adopting elements of humanity's aggressive tactics, finding themselves unable to deny the results those tactics consistently produced. Younger Concord commanders, less bound by centuries of tradition, proved especially eager to learn from their human counterparts, studying human battle strategies with genuine curiosity rather than discomfort. Not everyone embraced this shift so readily. Elder statesmen like Corvain continued voicing concerns within the council chambers, warning that a war won through such ruthless methods might come at a cost far greater than anyone currently realized. What would happen, they asked, when this brutal, unstoppable fleet no longer had an external enemy to focus its aggression upon? Thrawn found himself unable to fully answer that question, caught between gratitude for humanity's undeniable battlefield success and genuine uncertainty about what kind of galaxy would exist once the war finally ended. For now, all he could do was continue watching, continue learning, and hope that whatever humanity truly was, ally or looming threat, their partnership would be enough to finally end the nightmare the Skarn Hive had brought upon the Concord. Far across the war-torn frontier, the true test of that partnership was already approaching as intelligence reports began revealing the location of something far more significant than any battle fought so far. The heart of the Skarn Hive itself. The intelligence had come from an unlikely source. During the destruction of a large Skarn bioship near the border system of Cathra, human salvage teams recovered a partially intact biological data core, something Concord scientists had never successfully retrieved before. After weeks of careful study, combining human computing technology with Concord biological expertise, researchers finally managed to extract fragments of coordinate data buried deep within the organic structure. What they found sent a wave of both hope and dread through the combined command staff of the Concord and Vanguard fleet. The data pointed to a single location deep within uncharted space, far beyond any territory either the Concord or their allies had ever explored. The suspected origin point of the Skarn Hive itself, a massive structure the scientists began calling the Core Nexus. Ambassador Thrin called an emergency joint council meeting aboard the Reckoning, bringing together senior Concord officials and human military leadership for the first time since the war had begun. The mood in the room was tense as Elena of Voss presented the findings to the assembled leaders. If this data is accurate, Voss explained, gesturing toward a holographic display showing the suspected location, we found the source of everything we've been fighting. Every biokip, every colony they've destroyed, all of it originates from this single structure. Destroy it, and we may be able to end this war entirely, rather than simply pushing back individual incursions, one system at a time. A murmur of cautious excitement spread through the Concord officials present, quickly followed by concerns about the enormous risk such an operation would involve. Corvin, the elder statesman who had voiced skepticism about human tactics before, spoke first. "This is uncharted territory, Admiral. We have no reliable maps, no accurate assessment of enemy strength at this location. A direct assault on the source of the hive itself could prove catastrophic, not just for your fleet, but for every ally who joins this operation. It could also end this war for good," Voss countered. "We've spent months fighting a defensive war, reacting to Skarn attacks after they've already begun. Every colony we've saved has come at a terrible cost. If we can strike directly at the source, we change everything. We stop reacting and start finishing this." The debate continued for hours, Concord officials weighing the tremendous risk against the potential for a decisive war-ending victory. Eventually, after much deliberation, the council reluctantly agreed to support the operation, authorizing a combined strike force made up of both Concord and human vessels to investigate and, if possible, destroy the core nexus. Preparation for the assault took nearly a month as combined engineering teams worked to modify existing warships for the extreme conditions expected near the hive's point of origin. Concord scientists warned that the region surrounding the core nexus likely contained biological hazards unlike anything encountered before, remnants of the strange alien environment that had originally given rise to the Skarn hive's unique physiology. Voss oversaw the preparations personally, working alongside Concord engineers to ensure the strike force would be as prepared as possible for whatever awaited them. She spent long hours reviewing battle simulations with her senior officers, refining strategies based on every piece of intelligence gathered from previous engagements with Skarn forces. "This isn't going to be like the battles we've fought so far," she told her assembled fleet commanders during a final briefing before departure. "We're not just fighting ships out there. We're striking at the very heart of this enemy, on ground or space that belongs entirely to them. Expect the unexpected. Expect them to fight with everything they have." The combined strike force departed 3 weeks later, a formation of nearly 200 warships, the majority provided by the Vanguard fleet, supported by Concord vessels equipped with specialized sensor arrays designed to help navigate the unfamiliar territory ahead. Ambassador Thren insisted on joining the mission personally, despite objections from several council members concerned for his safety. "I have watched humanity fight for the survival of my people since this alliance began," Thren told Voss as the fleet prepared for departure. "If this is to be the battle that ends this war, I intend to witness it firsthand, whatever the outcome may be." The journey into uncharted space proved as unsettling as the scientists had predicted. Sensor readings grew increasingly strange the deeper the fleet traveled, picking up faint biological signatures scattered across seemingly empty space, remnants of some ancient unknown ecosystem that the Skarn hive appeared to have originated from long before it began its assault on the wider galaxy. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of careful travel, the fleet arrived at their destination. The core nexus proved to be far larger and more terrifying than any of the intelligence reports had suggested. A massive organic structure hung suspended in space, its surface pulsing with faint bioluminescent light, surrounded by a defensive swarm of Skarn bioships numbering in the thousands. "That's considerably more than we anticipated," said one of Voss's senior officers, staring at the sensor readings with visible unease. Voss studied the tactical display carefully, her expression calm despite the overwhelming numbers displayed before her. "Then we adapt. All ships prepare for immediate engagement. Concentrate fire on the outer defensive formations first. We need to open a path toward the central structure." The battle that followed was unlike anything either the Concord or human forces had experienced before. The sheer number of Skarn bio ships defending the core nexus overwhelmed initial human tactics, forcing Voss and her officers to rapidly adjust their strategy mid-battle. Human warships fought with a desperate intensity, utilizing every advantage their advanced weaponry and unpredictable tactics could offer, while Concord vessels provided crucial support using their superior long-range sensor capabilities to help coordinate the chaotic battlefield. Hours into the engagement, with losses mounting on both sides, Voss made a decision that would later be remembered as one of the defining moments of the entire war. Rather than continuing the costly battle against the overwhelming defensive swarm, she ordered a small strike team, led personally by her most experienced pilots, to attempt a direct assault on the core nexus itself, banking on human ingenuity and speed to bypass the majority of the Skarn defenses entirely. "It's an enormous risk," warned one of her officers as she gave the order. "If that strike team fails, we lose our best pilots and gain nothing in return." "If we don't take that risk," Voss replied firmly, "we'll be fighting this same battle again and again until there's nothing left of either fleet." Sometimes victory requires exactly the kind of risk no one else is willing to take. The strike team, flying some of humanity's fastest and most maneuverable fighter craft, executed a daring run directly through the heart of the Skarn defensive formation, weaving between massive bioships with a combination of skill and sheer audacity that left Concord observers watching in stunned amazement. Reaching the core nexus itself, the strike team deployed a series of specially designed explosive charges directly into the structure's outer shell, charges engineered specifically to disrupt the biological processes, believed to sustain the entire hive's collective consciousness. The resulting explosion tore through the core nexus in a cascading wave of destructive energy, the structure's bioluminescent glow flickering wildly before finally going dark entirely. Across the battlefield, Skarn bioships that had been fighting with coordinated, terrifying efficiency suddenly began moving erratically, their unified consciousness thrown into chaos as the source of their coordination collapsed. Sensing the shift, Voss immediately pressed the advantage. "All ships converge and finish this. Do not let them recover." The remaining Skarn forces, no longer capable of coordinated resistance, were quickly overwhelmed by the combined might of the human and Concord fleets. Within hours, what remained of the once terrifying hive defense had been reduced to scattered, disconnected fragments incapable of mounting any meaningful further resistance. As the battle finally ended, an exhausted silence fell over the combined fleet. Ambassador Thren, watching the aftermath from the Bridge of the Reckoning, turned to Elena Voss with an expression of profound relief mixed with lingering disbelief. "You did it," he said quietly. "You actually did it." Voss allowed herself a rare, tired smile, watching the wreckage of the Skarn hive's origin point drift silently in the darkness of space. "We did it, Ambassador. All of us together." The war that had threatened to consume an entire civilization was finally, truly, coming to an end. But as the combined fleet began preparations to return home, both human and Concord leaders alike understood that the true challenge, learning to live alongside one another in the aftermath of such a brutal, transformative conflict, was only just beginning. In the months following the destruction of the core nexus, the galaxy slowly began to heal from the wounds inflicted by 3 years of relentless Skarn aggression. Colonies that had been abandoned during the darkest days of the war saw survivors returning, rebuilding homes and cities that had once seemed lost forever. Concord worlds that had lived under constant threat of annihilation finally experienced something many of their citizens had almost forgotten was possible: peace. Yet even as celebrations spread across Concord territory, a quieter, more complicated conversation was taking place within the highest levels of Concord leadership. Humanity had saved them. There was no denying that simple truth. But the manner in which that salvation had been achieved left many officials deeply uncertain about what kind of relationship the Concord should maintain with their new, undeniably powerful ally. Ambassador Thren found himself at the center of these discussions once again, now serving as the primary liaison between Concord leadership and the human government back on Earth. He had witnessed firsthand the full extent of humanity's military capability, watched the Vanguard fleet execute tactics so aggressive and effective that they had fundamentally changed how Concord military strategists approached warfare. He had also seen the toll such tactics took, not just on the enemy, but on the human soldiers who carried them out. During a private conversation aboard Velkar Prime, held shortly after Elena, Voss and a small diplomatic delegation arrived to formally discuss the future of the Concord-Earth Alliance. Thren finally voiced the question that had been weighing on Concord leadership since the war's end. "You have proven yourselves capable of things we never imagined possible," Thren said, standing across from Voss in a quiet meeting room overlooking the rebuilt gardens of the Concord capital. "You saved our civilization when we had nearly given up hope. For that, you have earned our deepest gratitude and our respect." "But," Voss asked, sensing the hesitation in his voice. But Thren continued carefully, "Many among our council now find themselves wondering what it means to have such a powerful, capable ally so close to our borders. Your methods, effective as they were, revealed a willingness toward violence and risk that our own culture has spent millennia trying to move beyond. We saved ourselves from one existential threat. Some fear we may have simply traded it for another, less immediate one." Voss considered his words carefully before responding, understanding the legitimate concern behind them. She had spent enough time working alongside the Concord to genuinely respect their culture, their commitment to diplomacy and peaceful cooperation, even if she did not always share their more cautious approach to conflict. "I understand that fear, Ambassador. I won't pretend it isn't justified. We are a young species by your standards. Our history is shorter, and yes, far more violent than your own. But I want you to understand something important. We didn't build the Vanguard fleet because we wanted a war. We built it because we understood that peace, real peace, sometimes requires the ability to defend it decisively when threatened. We used that fleet to save your people, not to conquer them. And if a day comes, Theron asked quietly, when your fleet turns its attention toward conquest rather than defense, Boss met his gaze steadily. Then I hope our alliance and the trust we've built through this war will be strong enough to prevent that from ever happening. We didn't come here to become your ruler's ambassador. We came here because you asked for help, and because deep down, humanity has always struggled to ignore someone in need, even when helping comes at great cost to ourselves. The conversation continued for hours, touching on the complicated future both civilizations now faced together. In the following weeks, formal negotiations began between Concord leadership and human diplomats, establishing the framework for what would eventually become a long-term alliance between the two civilizations. Trade agreements were signed, scientific exchange programs established, and careful diplomatic protocols put in place to help bridge the significant cultural differences between the two species. Not every aspect of the relationship remained smooth. Some Concord worlds, still deeply unsettled by the sheer scale of destruction humanity had proven capable of unleashing, remained wary of closer ties with Earth, preferring cautious, distant cooperation rather than deep integration. Certain human military leaders, meanwhile, grew frustrated with what they viewed as excessive Concord caution, arguing that the Alliance's full potential remained untapped due to lingering Concord hesitation. Elena Voss, now recognized as one of the primary architects of humanity's victory against the Skarnhive, found herself navigating this delicate new political landscape with the same careful determination she had shown throughout the war itself. She understood that winning the war had been, in many ways, the easier challenge. Building a lasting, stable peace between two such different civilizations would require patience, understanding, and compromise from both sides. Back on Earth, the return of the Vanguard fleet sparked celebrations across the globe, as news of humanity's decisive victory spread through every nation. For the first time in history, the entire world had united behind a single, shared purpose, setting aside old rivalries and conflicts to answer a call for help that had come from beyond the stars. Statues were built honoring the fleet's sacrifice, and new schools of thought emerged questioning what humanity's newfound place among the galaxy's civilizations truly meant for the future. Dr. Amara Chum, whose small monitoring agency had first detected the original distress signal so many months earlier, found herself thrust into a new role entirely, helping coordinate humanity's expanding diplomatic and scientific relationships with the wider galaxy. Standing before a room full of young scientists eager to study the newly opened frontier of interstellar diplomacy, she reflected on how far humanity had come since that first terrifying signal had arrived. We didn't know what we were stepping into, she told the gathered students. We didn't know if we could win or if answering that call would bring ruin to our own world instead. But we chose to help anyway, because that's who we decided to be, even facing the complete unknown. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, whispers of humanity's decisive, ruthless victory over the Skarnhive began spreading beyond Concord territory. reaching other civilizations who had, until now, remained entirely unaware of Earth's existence. Some viewed the reports with cautious admiration, recognizing the value of such a powerful potential ally. Others reacted with genuine unease, wary of a species capable of such overwhelming, calculated aggression when pushed into conflict. Ambassador Thrin, now serving as the primary bridge between these two vastly different civilizations, found himself reflecting often on the strange, transformative journey the Concorde had experienced since first sending that desperate signal toward a small, unassuming blue planet. Humanity had arrived not as the gentle heroes many had originally hoped for, but as something far more complicated, capable of tremendous violence in defense of those they had chosen to protect, yet equally capable of genuine compassion and sacrifice when it truly mattered. Standing once more at the window of the Concorde Council Chamber, now overlooking rebuilt cities rather than burning ruins, Thrin considered the uncertain future that lay ahead. The galaxy had changed forever the moment humanity answered that call for help. Whether that change would ultimately lead toward a lasting era of cooperation and peace, or toward new conflicts, born from humanity's undeniable strength, remained to be seen. For now, though, the stars above Velkar Prime shone brightly once more, no longer marked by the distant glow of burning worlds. And across the vast expanse of newly explored space, humanity stood as something entirely new among the galaxy's civilizations, neither purely savior nor purely conqueror, but something far more complex. A young, determined species finally stepping fully into its place among the stars, forever changed by the brutal, unforgettable war that had proven exactly what it was capable of when everything was at stake.